Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, today we are gathered here. Every day is an opportunity to increase our knowledge, and inshallah, this session will be not only beneficial to us as an individual, but also to the Ummah. So just to recap, I'm sorry, Alhamdulillah, today we have Professor Khairudin, our Professor Fellow here at ISTEC, physically with us today to discuss on Iqbal's Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. But before, I'd like to have a recap on the previous session. So in the previous session, in this series of iconic books in modern Islamic thought, our Prof has enlightened us with a reading methodology in which we can gain wholly on the book on itself, not just a mere text, in which he taught us to read the text with internal appreciation and criticism, as well as to read intertextually and also to understand the multitude of contexts, in which if we look at Muhammad Abdu's Risalat Tawhid, or in English, famously known as Theology of Unity, but if we to understand that the overarching theme was on reason, not really on theology on itself. So then we can ask these questions. Why does he then name it in that way? So we can see that he received certain opposition, and some conservative ulama would label him as new Mu'tazilite. Then we can also ask questions. Why does they think this way? So when we read Risalat Tawhid, we can also see that he was in a way have a tendency towards Mu'tazilite thought as well. And also why we also need to understand why he put primacy on reason is also because of his subscribe to the idea of declinism, and also he want to fought against this narrative of the Orientalists where Islam is an irrational religion. And so we can see that the book, or we need to understand the book not from just the text, from the text in itself, but also from the dominant idea at the time, and also the social context of his time. So without further ado, today we will discuss Iqbal seminal work, which is Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. Tafadhal mashkur.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you everyone for making time today again for the next session on reading some of the iconic books in modern Islamic thought. Again, in as much as I'm doing my own part for ISTEC, I also want to promote the series of lectures by Professor Ahmad Marikan. He's been doing also, and I've been following lectures on some key thinkers that can also help us to illuminate not only the understanding of the Muslim world, but also the understanding of the vagaries of changes in the world today. So this is the whole objective of all of these talks that we are organizing in ISTEC, and I would like everyone to see it as a whole of ISTEC approach rather than a piecemeal, my talk, Prof. Ahmad's talk, and other people's lectures, all actually an integrated thing. The last session, I covered two things, as Harif was mentioning. The first is how to read books, and I want to just reiterate this point again, that books, if we follow the book of Walter J. Ong, and I would encourage everyone to read it. It's a beautiful book. The title of the book is On Orality. The title is On Orality, and Walter J. Ong, who was a linguist and a literary critic, said that books by nature, according to him, are dumb. Why he said that books are dumb is not that all books are dumb books, but he says that books, unlike orality, do not actually talk to us directly, which means that if you ask a question to a book, the book doesn't answer your question. But in as much as books are dumb, books are also objects that allow us to not only reflect on what the book is telling us, but how our thinking on certain issues can be further illuminated with our dialogue with the books that we read. So we must begin with that when we read books, we're not only trying to understand the logic of arguments of the author itself. The whole process of reading is actually to understand ourselves. And this is the whole point of these iconic books that we are going to go through for how many weeks, Harith? 5 sessions so far. Yeah, there's actually 15 books, but let's limit it to 5 books for now, because I said to Harith that I will not give a lecture until I finish writing a whole article about the book in itself. Then we have a lecture. But anyway, I want to begin with that. But the second thing that we need to emphasize is that whenever we read books, we must also understand that books are an upshot or a consequence or a product of the thinking or mentalite, as the French people would say, or the Germans would call it, zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. And more importantly, we must ground the spirit of the times with the material, social, as well as other conditions that shape the book. So books basically become something because the author is also communicating with issues that are both ideological or ideational and concrete in their times. When we read books like that, we can then understand why certain authors say certain things. Okay, that's the first thing, the methodology of reading. So we will have, I think I will arrange with Harith, another 5 series on how to read books. Okay, so kita belajar lah macam mana nak baca buku. We'll learn how to read books properly. Right? The second thing is that I'm not Pakistani, and I want to mention this as an aside, because there are people who say that you need to be Malaysian to talk about Malaysia, you need to be Singaporean to talk about Singapore, you need to be Indian to talk about India. It's a flawed and illogical argument. The beautiful thing about books, and this is actually in the tradition of Islam, when we read the Quran, for example, Alif Lam Mim, Dhalikal Kitabul la Raiba fi Hudal lil Muttaqin. Allah invites us into the Quran by using the powerful terminology called kitab. Why Allah uses kitab? Because part of the reason is that the Quran is the kitab, but the book that he is referring to is the book that is universal for everyone. The Quran is for everybody. Hudal lin nas. So it is a guidance for mankind. So even if we are reading Muhammad Iqbal and we are not Pakistani or Indian or South Asian or philosophers or someone who is trained in the areas that he is trained, we can still engage with him. Books are by nature universal, dialogical, and more importantly, books are supposed to provide inspiration for anyone who's within the field by which the authors are writing in, and also people who are outside. And indeed, if you want to understand Iqbal, Muhammad Iqbal, you must understand that the man is a multi-versatile thinker. So I want to begin with this also. So take out from your mind that you need to be Pakistani to learn a Pakistani thinker. You need to be a Malaysian to be a Malaysian thinker. It doesn't exist, at least in the Islamic tradition. If you are outside the Islamic tradition, I don't know. But in the Islamic tradition, all knowledge, al-hikmah, dalatul mu'min. Hikmah is the lost wisdom of every mu'min, and everybody is entitled to it. So then let's dive into this book. So the book that I want to look at, and Iqbal has written a few books. One of it is actually The Evolution of Metaphysics in Persia, which was his PhD thesis. I'm going to talk about it later on. But his iconic book is actually The Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. I want to begin with a quote from him where he says, "Look at the evils of the world around you and protect yourself from them." So he begins with the issue of fasad, which is so relevant when we look at our times. The whole purpose of writing books is actually to combat evil, according to Iqbal. Our teachers give all the wrong messages to our youth. And this is the second point that you can get from Iqbal. Do not be afraid to depart from what your teacher has taught you. Farishno has an interesting book. The title is What Your Teachers Don't Tell You. Okay. But Iqbal is not only saying that. Iqbal is saying that whatever that you have inherited from the people who have taught you, be thankful. But know that your teacher, much like any teacher in the world, except for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, can sometimes make mistakes. So we must begin with this. So powerful, eh? When you look at Iqbal, since they take away the natural flair from the soul, take it from me that all knowledge is useless until it is connected with your life. There is no such thing as philosophy for philosophy's sake. So when we don't want to talk about Iqbal's reconstruction of religious thought, it is a reconstruction of religious thought, not to change thought only, but the reconstruction of religious thought to change the world. So if Karl Marx once said against Hegel, that Hegel says that philosophy is for philosophy's sake, the point is to philosophize further, Karl Marx said that the point is to change it. And this is what Iqbal is trying to say, that all thought is not only meant to change thought, all thought is actually meant to change the world until it is connected with your life, because the purpose of knowledge is nothing but to show you the splendors of yourself. If what you read, if what you study, if the things that you have listened from me doesn't change yourself, then it is useless knowledge. As simple as that. Atamuruna nasa bil birri wa tansawna anfusakum wa antum tatlunal kitab. Surah Baqarah. Right? You call onto people to do good, but you forget yourself. But still, you have read the kitab. Allah refers back to the book again. So the book is supposed to change yourself. So whenever you all read books, including myself, always remember that the reading of books, at least from Iqbal's perspective, which he took from the Quran, must lead to self-transformation. When you transform yourself, then you can transform the world. Okay? We are going to use a different approach for my session, and it's always been the case. 15 minutes I will talk, and then we'll have 5 minutes discussion, and then we will go on like that. Are you all okay with this? Semua boleh, eh? Any violent protests? Anyone is unhappy that I'm not a Pakistani? Nobody, yeah? Okay, let's go on. All right, so I just want to put this very interesting translation, and the Indonesians are very good at it. I don't know whether there's a Malaysian translation. I checked, they want Pustaka and by IRF. Okay, by IRF has translated it. I just want to put this in because I want to show how pervasive the influence of Iqbal has been throughout the world. His books have been translated into so many languages, and Indonesia and Bahasa Malaysia has been among the languages that you can find his books being translated into. So if you don't like reading Iqbal in English, and indeed later on I will say that his writing is a bit turgid and a little bit difficult to understand sometimes. Iqbal, sometimes you have to read him again and again and again to understand what he's trying to say. When he can do it in one sentence, he do it in several sentences. Don't do that for your PhD thesis because you will fail. Still, he has been translated into Malay. And this is a challenge for us to kind of engage with him. So let us begin first with the thinker. So again, whenever we read any book, the first thing that we need to understand before we read the book is the person who wrote the book itself. So reading biographies is as important as reading the book in itself. Never start reading a book until you have done thorough research on the person who had written that book, because the life of that person gives you a splash of why that person had written the book to begin with. Now, the interesting thing about Iqbal is that his life is so complex and so complicated that he has been largely misunderstood, number one, but more importantly, he was always struggling to understand himself. And this is the thing. I'm sure young people nowadays experience the same thing, because whenever I speak to young people, they seem to not understand themselves. Betul tak? Right? All young people say, I don't understand myself. Don't worry, you are Iqbal. All of you are Iqbals. That's why I begin with the first quote. The first quote was directed to whom? To the youth. And this is the beautiful thing about Iqbal. Until the day of his death, Maulana Nadwi, actually visited him together with some other Maulanas. And Nadwi wrote a book about Iqbal, saying that one of those things that you can see about Iqbal, even though he was very old, was that he was very youthful in terms of his thinking. And that's why he's always misunderstood. Iqbal has been described in so many ways. Number one, people have called him the modern version of the Persian polymath Imam Al-Ghazali. In fact, if you read the Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, he criticized Al-Ghazali quite heavily actually in the book. Very obliquely, but in a very sustained basis. Number two, he has also been described as the reincarnation of the Anatolian Sufi poet Rumi, because he wrote a lot of shi'r. And if you read the Reconstruction, it is written in a very flowery way, and I will explain about this later. Number three, he has also been called as a pan-Islamist, and this is something that the West doesn't want to acknowledge, that Iqbal's lifetime project was about Muslim unity. I'm going to talk about this on Sunday, and I hope it's recorded. We're going to have a session on this whole idea of Muslim unity. He was advocating for the unification of the spirit of Islam in his time. So he wanted Pakistan, even Indians in India, Indonesia, all countries in the world that are populated by Muslims to come together. And also he was called the founding father of Pakistan. He was the one who advocated that Muslims must have a separate land from the other Indians in India, right? And this is very interesting. Even though he was the founder of Pakistan, he was actually against nationalism. So Pakistan, as we understand it today as a nation and a nation state, was not the Pakistan that Iqbal envisioned. Right? He had a very fluid idea of what a nation is all about. And last but not least, so this is why I say very contradictory, he is also seen as an Indian patriot. Two of the national songs, anybody from India here? Nobody from India. This is very weird. Only one. There's a token Indian, but he's from Kenya, actually. Kenya, right? Or Uganda? Tanzania. Tanzania. Studied in India, from Aligarh. So he's also seen, and Prof. Imtiaz would know this, as an Indian patriot. Two of the national songs of India are actually from Iqbal's poem, right? And if you look at the list by which he was described, Fazlur Rahman, another Pakistani thinker who was a professor at Chicago, said that it would not be indeed too much to say that next to the Prophet ﷺ, and perhaps to certain early figures of Islam, including Imam Ghazali, Iqbal has been subjected to the greatest amount of posthumous tyranny of interpretation at the expense of a genuine understanding. He has been described in so many ways that you somehow don't get at what he is all about. And indeed, that was what Iqbal was. In a very beautiful intellectual biography of Iqbal by Mustansir Mir, he said it very nicely. On accosting the scholar one day, somebody was following Iqbal somewhere one day. Iqbal himself confessed, and he said it. He did not know the truth about himself, and that he wished someday to see Iqbal. And this is actually the struggle of all thinkers. If you think about Imam Ghazali, for example, Imam Ghazali started out as a faqih, and then he went into a period of so-called skepticism, and then he became a philosopher, falasuf, and then he became skeptical about philosophy, and then he entered into theology, and then he became also disenchanted with theology, and then he became a Sufi, and then some people say that before he died, he actually studied hadith. So Iqbal said that he wrote a poem that concludes with this couplet: even Iqbal does not know Iqbal, and this, by God, is no joke at all. While the note of levity in the poem is unmistakable, the essential point has been made, namely that Iqbal is a multifaceted personality, that he is, in the sense, very difficult to understand precisely because he doesn't understand himself. That doesn't mean that you cannot understand Iqbal. So I want to correct this. The fact that he's such a complex thinker, the fact that he has been described in so many different ways, the fact that his books can be read in so many different directions, it doesn't mean that we cannot come or arrive to some kind of understanding of what Iqbal is all about. Okay? And that brings me to a little bit about his biography. Before that, any question from anyone? Any concerns, any questions, any reflections? This is the nice thing about Southeast Asian audience. Right? Everybody has nothing to say. Yes. Yes, I come.
Bismillah. When you read Iqbal's poetry, do you see you mentioned that Iqbal doesn't understand himself. Do you see that type of he's trying to understand himself in that poetry itself?
Yes. So I suggest that you first read one of his books called Stray Reflections. Stray Reflections is actually a book of his thinkings and musings, right? And he wrote it actually just as notes and was compiled together. When you read it, he was actually describing himself and his struggle. On one hand, he said he admired Western philosophers. On the other hand, he said that these Western philosophers are actually nonsensical. On one hand, he said that, he was very disenchanted with a lot of Islamic scholars. On the other hand, he said that we must dive deep into the oceans of Islamic thought. He was struggling with his identity. And this is normal during his time because they were encountering many different streams of thought. And for him, and I'm going to get into it, as is an excellent question. He came from a very traditionally oriented background, right? His father was a Sufi. He was steeped in the Sufi tradition, and then he came out of it and studied philosophy. It's the same trajectory as Imam Ghazali. And that's why the book Stray Reflections, I don't encourage you to read his poems first, because you will surely get lost to where he's going. But Stray Reflections is the best because it's a kind of him having this auto-criticism of himself. Okay, so very good. Anyone else? Nobody? Yeah. You're not Pakistani, are you?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, very good. That's good.
How explicitly does he talk about this two-state solution? As you said that he advocated for basically a separate Muslim country. And that's my question.
Okay, read this book published by Cambridge University Press by this man called Iqbal Singh. Interesting, his name was Iqbal, but he's from Sikh background, and he talks about Muhammad Iqbal and the politics of Islamic nationalism. It's a very good book. It's a PhD thesis where he mentioned very explicitly through the study of Iqbal's poems and his political texts and speeches that Iqbal was very much keen on the two-state solution. Very clear. He says that there must be a separate state. Jinnah was the one who pushed it to the creation of Pakistan. But his idea of the two-state solution was not to be built through violence. It was to be built through negotiation with the majority that was in India then, which were the Hindus. And he also advocated this whole idea that even if there's going to be a separate state, the whole idea that one state is against the other state, which is the founding idea of what nationalism is all about, ought not to be what Pakistan is all about. That has been very much forgotten. Right? That part of Iqbal has been pushed aside, even by Pakistani scholars, sadly, and especially by Indian ones, that in the end, the idea of Pakistan is actually the idea of a truly Muslim, not Islamic. I have to qualify this. He never used the word, he doesn't use the word Islamic. He said it's a truly Muslim state with plural and cosmopolitan characteristics, because he understood, if you understand the geography of Bengal, of course you do because you're Pakistani, but the rest of you, Bengal in itself, or North India, is actually divided into so many tribes. There are the Pushtun people, there are even if you go to the Swat region and you go a bit to the south into now, it's called Bangladesh, they actually belong to different ethnic groups with very different languages. Right? So if you speak to someone in Bangladesh, one part of Bengal, the other part of Bengal who speak what we know today as Urdu, they actually speak two different languages, but Urdu was the connecting language other than Hindi. And Iqbal understood this. He understood the nuances. And that's why the idea of Pakistan was supposed to be a nation that is not steeped in nationalism. A nation that is not steeped in nationalism. That means nationalism, according to him, is a disease. Why is it a disease? He used the word a disease or an ailment, because nationalism has made Muslim feel that they are distinct from one another, and he never supported that. But the idea of a nation is to house people who had certain ends and objectives that cannot be achieved if they were minorities, at least during that time. Right? Okay, so can I go on now?
Yes.
5 minutes up. Yes, please, Prof. Please.
Thank you very much for explaining this about Iqbal. We can also compare him with Rabindranath Tagore, who is the Bengal poet. He also wrote against nationalism.
Yes.
Same like Iqbal, same time, and he also criticizes nationalism or like of Hindutva kind of thing. So here you have Iqbal as a Muslim, and here you have Rabindranath Tagore, who's a Hindu, but against the idea of Hindutva. Sorry to interrupt, but just wanted to
Very
compare.
powerful, Prof. Most of the profound Indian scholars of that time were against the whole idea of nationalism that is understood in racial terms. Even if they use the word nationalism, the understanding of nationalism is an ideology that would unite people within a given territory to understand that they have certain destinies that they can share together. Right? So Rabindranath Tagore truly understood what Iqbal was aiming for. Okay, so a bit of the biography of Iqbal. He was born actually in Punjab, which became the very place where Pakistan and India were separated. So he was in Sialkot in Punjab, and he was actually from a Hindu background. He was Kashmiri Pandit. His great grandfathers were actually Hindu, and they were Brahmins. Basically, Pandit means they were priests, right? And his father was actually from the Qadiriya Sufi order, and at a very young age, he actually mastered Persian and Arabic and finished his master's degree in India before he went on to do his PhD in Germany and learned German. He also had a bit of French and did his PhD in the University of Munich. Now, what's interesting when you look at his biography, even Southeast Asian scholars such as Jose Rizal went to Germany. Jose Rizal, maybe we can have a session one day on Jose Rizal, actually studied in the University of Heidelberg. He did basically ophthalmology. Now, what's interesting to take note here is that even though Germans were very racist then, especially with the coming of Hitler, they actually also welcomed a lot of people from Asia to study in many of their universities. Then, when he came back, he was an Anglophile before he left. Anglophile means like he always saw himself as also British, or at least upper class Indians who were very English in taste and in orientation. But when he came back, he became anti-colonial and he became very Ummah-centric, and he was involved in the establishment of Pakistan. He was the president of the All India Muslim League and other movements as well. That brings us then to his intellectual outlook. So now we want to understand how the man structures his thought and his mind. Okay. So again, the book by Khalid Masood, I think, is one of the best starting points. I will show you some other books that you need to return to. But the first thing that we need to address is this charge that has been made by many Orientalist scholars that Iqbal was not an organized and coherent thinker because he was, above all else, a poet. And this you need to clear, because this charge that Iqbal is not systematic is very unfair. It is based on the Western Enlightenment idea that all ideas must follow a certain logical sequence, which is a very Western sequence of reasoning. And Khalid Masood, of course, all other scholars have made this argument as well, but he made it very profoundly. He says that Iqbal's reasoning is actually very emotive. And this is something that Orientalist scholars do not accept, that one uses one's emotions and imbue it in one's writing. So you must have been told by your PhD and master's supervisors, don't be emotional about your PhD thesis. Turn it into an object outside yourself. It's not correct, right? In social science, we have this terminology called positionality. Positionality means you state your position in what you are writing about. No good scholarship, at least in Islam, can be written until and unless your emotions are actually imbued into that work. Because what you are writing, at least from our perspective as Muslims, is part of your soul entering into that writing. And that's why if you read the works of all the great scholars in the past, they will always say, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali, the Hujjatul Islam, who speaks for Islam, who's the reviver of Islam, they always say it in an emotive way. But when we say we are using emotions, that doesn't mean that we are being irrational. So do not take away emotions from what you're writing about. You must feel for it. It is not an object. And this is the problem with Enlightenment thought. They have differentiate between the subject and the object. Okay, so I want you all to do a Sheikh Google search or Maulana GPT search about what has been called as the object-subject distinction, which leads, as Professor Naqib Alatas has also highlighted, the rise of dualistic thought. Subject-object distinction also leads to the suppression of emotions in the writing of academic writings. Right? You are always told not to be emotional, but emotions are not bad. In fact, they are all too human. Okay, so he was very emotive, but he was also very intuitive rather than purely rational and systematic. And more importantly, Iqbal was not only a poet who's trying to bring you into the world of speculation. He was very much concerned with practical transformations. And later on, I will make this big argument. The big thesis of the Reconstruction is about individual transformation that will lead to civilizational transformation. Right? So he was very concerned with the ummah, with the civilization, not only the Muslim civilization, but the whole world civilization and the problems that come with it. And that's why when you read the Reconstruction, in as much as you read Muhammad Abdu, Risalatul Tawheed, you will see these thinkers using the Quran. So that's the other day we had a conference with what was the Oxford Dialogue, and I started my speech with reciting the Quran, right? From the perspective of the West, and I got this before. I gave a lecture once in Stockholm, and after the lecture, I was sharing with them about the Quran, how the Quran can actually inform the study of history and social science. One professor came to me and said to me, "Sorry, you're not a historian, you're actually a theologian," he says. I said, "But I'm trained as history, I'm not trained as a theology, in theology." He said, "No, you cited the Quran in the manner to which a theologian would do it." So this is how they do this subject-object distinction. But Iqbal doesn't see this difference, right? Reciting the Quran or interspersing the Quran into your academic works doesn't make you a theologian, right? But it makes you understand that the Quranic arguments are as academic as all other social scientific arguments. And this is what Iqbal is trying to argue for, that one does not need to be apologetic about the Quran, and that the Quran can be used if it is cited properly and explained properly in every academic work. So if you read the book that I wrote called Muslim Cosmopolitanism, which is published by a Western press, Edinburgh University Press, the whole book is actually organized around the Quranic injunction. Ya Yuhannas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alnakum syu'uban wa qabaila lita'arafu. I started with that verse, Surah Hujurat, and explain how this verse can actually explain how Southeast Asian societies are actually very, very cosmopolitan. So Iqbal uses the same exposition, and he uses the dialectics of tasawwuf. So tasawwuf, as Iqbal understands it, and later we're going to talk about Sufism a little bit more, is not the tasawwuf of the swirling dervishes. It's not the tasawwuf of the speculative abstraction, rather a tasawwuf that leads to transformation of life. Okay, so this is a bit about him that we need to understand. And I mentioned just now, he said it very clearly. I am opposed to nationalism because I see it in the germs of atheistic materialism. So I don't want to show how the way he constructs his argument is very practical, it's very activistic, which I look upon as the greatest danger to modern humanity. Patriotism is a perfectly natural virtue and has a place in the moral life of a man. Yet that which really matters is man's faith, his culture, his historical tradition. These are the things which my eyes are worth living for, in my eyes are worth living and dying for, and not a piece of earth with which the spirit of man happens to be temporarily associated. That doesn't mean that he said don't defend your land. He's not saying that. He said that when nationalism becomes blind patriotism and becomes something that people think is an end in itself, it becomes irrational. Because when you go back to the Quranic so-called injunction, there is no concept as defend your land until to the level that you come up with this fictive idea called nationalism. This is what he's trying to say. Okay? That then leads me to how then he developed his argument. So this is the beautiful thing about Iqbal, and you can read the book of Anne-Marie Schimmel about it, and some people will question me and say, why are you now citing an Orientalist? Right? If anyone has ever read the books of Anne-Marie Schimmel, how do you pronounce it? Schimmel? The person would understand how this lady is more Muslim than sometimes most Muslims. We are still disputing whether she died as a Muslim or not. I would like to believe that she did, because every time when people ask him whether she's a non-Muslim, she says she doesn't want to answer the question. And usually that's the case for a lot of these Orientalists who are pro-Islam. They are actually more Islamic than what people can readily admit. Now, she argues that Iqbal actually drew heavily from the works of Western philosophers, using them to critique the West itself. And this is a methodology which I hope all PhD students and master students of IUM and ISTEC and elsewhere would use. Turn the tools of the West against the West. Because they have built methods, theories, and perspectives that are, and concepts that are useful for us to use. Useful to the extent that it helps us to understand how wrong they are, and sometimes how right they can be. We cannot say that the West is all wrong. I disagree with this. There are some very Puritan people who say that everything from the West is wrong, and then they go to the Western hospital. Right? Some don't. They only go for Ruqyah. Right? But the point being that Iqbal took from the West what was useful to understand his society, but more importantly, he did not take the West as they are. He took the West in order to criticize the West. So even if you read the works of Stuart Hall, of Karl Marx, of Hegel, of Wittgenstein, or whoever, read them with an understanding that they are to be criticized by their own thinking. And this is the methodology of Imam Ghazali. Imam Ghazali says, when you have an interlocutor, when you are arguing with someone, it is useless for you to show to that person that your position is superior than that person. The better method, according to Imam Ghazali in Munkif min Dalal, is to show the inconsistency of the very argument of the people who are debating with you. You get what I'm saying? And this is what Iqbal was trying to show. That the West, and I will quote him later when he talks about Nietzsche, the West always say that they got it all enlightened. But he's trying to say that they lost their way precisely through the very arguments that they constructed for themselves. Okay? Then more importantly, he took what was the best from the West to criticize the West, to also illuminate the ideas that he got from Islamic sources, to advance a fresh ideas of reform. So this is the other thing, that in many of his books, you can see that he goes philosophical, he turns into becoming poetic, he becomes a little bit self-reflective, he attacks the West, he defends some of the ideas, but in the end of it, he will quote the Quran, and then he will go back to saying, this is what we must do. And this is very, very important. Because the Quran says, فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ. Where are you going? Where are you going? Nak pergi mana ni? Semua pun tak tahu. Mana mau pergi? Pergi mana? Pergi mall. Nobody knows where they go. And Iqbal is saying that we need to know where we are going. So again, I said I'm going to show some books that everyone must read. You must read these 4 books. And now there are a lot of books that are trying to show how Iqbal's ideas, especially the book by this Turkish scholar, Zevkan Uzduk, who compares Iqbal with Kierkegaard, and then this book by Shabir Ahsan, who compares Iqbal with Leibniz, and then Nauman Fauzi's book on Iqbal's engagement with science, And the best of them all is actually the book by this Pakistani scholar based in London, whose name is Javid Majid. It's the best book, I feel, about Iqbal, other than the biography by Mustansir, who talks about how when we read Iqbal's work, we must understand that it was engaging against colonialism. And more importantly, you must look at the aesthetics of his writing, how he builds his words in such a manner that he puts it in a way that can inspire people. So that's why when you read his book, and when he engages with the West, he says, the only alternative open to us then is to tear off, and this is where the reform part comes, to tear off from Islam the hard crust. In Malay, the hard crust means batu yang keras, batu yang keras, which has been immobilized and essentially dynamic outlook on life, and to rediscover the original verities of freedom, equality, and solidarity with a view to rebuild. So again, very activistic. Our moral, social, and political ideals out of their original simplicity and universality. So the last three sentences are the last three words are the most important. 4 words: original simplicity and universality. So the first word is simplicity. That he says that at the end of the day, when we go back to what Islam is, things are not difficult. Who made it difficult? Who made it difficult? Muslims made it difficult. The philosophers made it difficult. The theologians make it difficult. The scholars make it difficult. The understanding of Islam in its essence is actually very simple, right? And he says that at the end of the day, what is Islam? Islam is universal. Islam is not for Muslims per se. Islam is for who? Islam is for everybody. Okay? So 5 minutes up before I talk about the book now.
There was a comment online. He said that Iqbal's he was what was you were using? His disenchantment with himself was rather a poetic device to be seen as spiritually elevated to avoid the scrutiny of his ideas. What do you think of that?
Yeah, you can argue it in that manner, but at least from what we have gotten from many of his biographers, especially people who were engaging with him personally, he was always a man who is inquisitive about himself. And this is what Islamic thought is all about. If you encounter a thinker who says that my ideas have not changed since the last 40 years, then you have a problem. That is not a thinker, right? What is a thinker? A thinker is always someone who is always self-reproaching. What is the Arabic word for self-reproaching? What? Nafsul lawama, right? Always asking himself more than ordinary people. Ibn Rushd wrote about this in a very profound way. He says that what differentiates the philosophers from the ordinary people is not that the philosophers are smarter than ordinary people. He said what differentiates the philosophers from the ordinary people is that the philosophers are always in a state of continuous questioning. And this is what Iqbal was. He was always questioning his position, and he changed his position along the way. The West wanted to reify him. Reify means they wanted to solidify him to something. And he says, oh, Iqbal is just someone who was concerned with Pakistan. No, he was not only concerned with Pakistan, he was concerned with the Ummah. And the same is it when we read other thinkers, Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, Abdul Qadir al-Jalani. There's no such thing as a thinker having a kind of a hard crust that defines his total career in one way. If you encounter that thinker, stay away from him. Why? Why? Stay away from such thinkers. What? Static lah, kan? That is the epitome of taqlid. And it's not only taqlid as in Hamka said it very nice. This is, he says, jahil murakkab. He say, compound ignorance. Who has compound ignorance? The ulama, he says. Why the ulama has compound ignorance? Not the religious scholars, he said. The ulama means scholars as a whole. Why? Because they don't know that they don't know. Faham tak? They don't know that they don't know. Things that they don't know, they think that they know, hence they don't change their minds. And even when you explain to them that this is not correct, they will not change. Why? Why they do not change? Hasbuna ma wajadna alaihi aba'ana. Enough. Whatever that has been given to us by our ancestors. No need to change. Listen to me. You will be in a good position. Iqbal was not like that. Okay, I'm not taking aim at anyone. If you are feeling it, I'm just talking about Iqbal. Okay, one more question. Anyone? Anything online? No. Anybody else want to bring up a point? Here, please, you can disagree with me. We are engaging a book and I could have read him wrongly and I could have said something that is wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. Yes.
Thank you, Prof. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong,
No.
but I'm just going to agree with what you mentioned, of course, with the fact that this dualistic thinking is kind of the sine qua non of enlightenment rationality.
Yes.
My observations of this issue is there is also the fear of the passing of time, which is chronophobia, which was very present in the West, especially during Nazi Germany as well.
Exactly.
This need to leave a legacy. So for us Muslims, generally speaking, we know where we came from and we know where we're going, alhamdulillah. So we don't really have that fear of the passing of time because we know that, time is Allah. Allah is time. So my observation is also the fact that because of this dualistic thinking, the need to leave a legacy, the need to have an imprint on history itself has caused a lot of problems, because then you would have this categorization of, again, us and them, and then this, you're boxing in people into those categories without thinking that people can be polymaths. I think it still can be seen today in politics as well, in terms of what's happening in Gaza and everywhere else. So that's just my.
It's a very good point, because Iqbal talks about this. Iqbal talks about the whole. There's one chapter in the Reconstruction that talks about time and the place of human beings in time, and he talks about the notion of immortality, that the West always want to be immortal in the sense that they don't mean that you live forever, but they say you're going to leave something that will have an imprint on the world forever. But we know in the Quran, kullu man alayha fan wa yabqa wajhu rabbika dhil jalali wal ikram. Everything will disappear, and the only thing that will exist is the face of Allah. And Iqbal says that time, as what Islam understands it, is immortal. There will always be time because Allah is time. But human beings are finite in time. In as much as we exist in a certain time, we don't exist in another time. Still, the ruh is immortal. The ruh is immortal. فَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ أَحَدًا. Beautiful how the Quran says. Since your soul is infinite, it's going to be there forever with time, hence you do good. And whatever good you do need not be immortal. I repeat. That means even if you do good, it's okay if people don't remember what good you do. Because who remembers? Allah. And he explains it beautifully. Of course, his language has so much bunga-bunga and flowers that you don't actually get the essential. But this is his point. That until and unless Muslims understand his position in time, he cannot shape himself or society. Once it's locked in, he understands that time is immortal, he is mortal, but his ruh is immortal, he knows exactly what to do. And this is the problem of modern Muslims. Why are we lost? Because we always think that we can change time. We can change time. Why I say that we can change time? Because we always think that we are in control of everything. Modernity makes us believe that way. But the real idea of time, according to Iqbal, is that you are not in control. Who controls? The divine. But you can have control when you understand what you are supposed to do vis-a-vis the divine. It's a bit philosophical, but it's not difficult. When you ground it in the Quran, it becomes easy. So that's why. That's why we have to read Surah Al-Kahf every week. Why? Because the last part of Surah Al-Kahf is so powerful. Innal ladhina amanu wa amilu salihati kanat lahum jannatul firdausi nuzula. If you read that ayat, it's actually about movement into time. Why is it movement into time? Firdausi Jannatul Firdaus. That means Allah is telling you when you do good, wa'amilu salihat, you are going to be immortal in time. Where are you going to go? Jannatul Firdausi Nuzul. This is what Iqbal is trying to stress. Okay? Can I go on? Yes.
To Arif, Iqbal says to Nietzsche, Nietzsche is the sign of modernity, who says, I think so I am. Iqbal says, had I met him, I would have told him to believe in God, showed to him to believe in God. And so that's why Iqbal talks about self, not I think so I believe, but asrar Khudi, as you said,
Asar.
to know yourself. And then in a dynamic manner, as you said.
Yes.
Just sorry for
Okay, I'll take the question later.
Okay.
Is that okay? Sorry, yeah, we'll take the question later. So again, when you read the book, one thing that you must understand when you read Abdu, Iqbal, most of the reformist texts, they are didactic. What do you mean by didactic? They are written in such a way that it feels as if they are talking to you. And that's why they are very powerful. Okay. And of course, these are actually lectures that he delivered across India and London from 1929 to 34. These years are very crucial to mention here because they are under the ambit of the Great Depression. The world is undergoing a great transformation. And Muslims are undergoing a lot of pain and suffering during this time. Now, as I said, the language is very poetic and reflexive and sometimes overly flowery. The beautiful thing is that Iqbal did not write it in Urdu or Persian, which are the two languages that he wrote most of his poems. Why? Pakistani must answer. Why didn't he write in Persian or Urdu? Huh? Exactly. So during his time, when the book finally came out in 1934, Muslims didn't like the book, just for the record. Just for the record. And for anyone here who thinks that you want to reform your Muslim society, take note, your people will hate you first. That is normal. No prophet is celebrated in his own land. And that's normal. Nobody likes reconstruction of religious thought. Some of the Maulanas, the young ones, like Abul Hasan Na'wi and others celebrated it. But most Muslims felt that this is a book not for us. This is to them a Western book. The Hindus celebrated it. Ironically, right? When the book is actually quite stinging against certain religious traditions. The West saw that this is like another level of philosophy altogether, even though he criticized the West. Okay, so we need to understand when we read him and you find him difficult, understand, as our brother had said it very nicely just now, the book was meant for Muslims first, for the West second, but Muslims totally didn't understand him. Then, right? The sad tragedy of most thinkers. They are usually, as I begin just now, misunderstood and underappreciated. Right? And you see it also in Malaysia too. So many great thinkers are always pushed aside, cast aside, because they are not appreciated during that time. Now, the question that we need to ask when we read the book, and this is another method of reading books, study the title. Whenever you read the book, you must analyze the title of the book. As I said during the last session on Abdu, the title Risalatul Tauhid is actually a cover. It is actually Risala al-Aqal. And he didn't want to say it. It's actually the Risala about the Aqal. He didn't want to say it because he didn't want the Muslims during his time for Abdu to say that he's a Mu'tazili. And the same is it with Iqbal. He didn't want to use the word reform or revival. Why? Because he was disinterested in changing the fundamentals of Islamic thought. But more importantly, he didn't want to mimic Afghani and Abdu. Because the language of that time was Nahda, revival, Islah, and Tajdeed. He said, no, is it very Pakistani? No, eh? Is this very Pakistani that they just don't want to follow? No, eh? Let's not essentialize them. But this is the beautiful thing about Pakistani thinkers. They are very original. They're very original. He said, I'm not doing reform. I'm not doing revival. I'm doing reconstruction. And what he means by reconstruction is he wants to reinstate the spirit of the prophetic era, the time of the Salafus Saleh, towards making Muslims more dynamic, universal, and attentive to the negative, as well as the corrupt elements that have crept into the faith. So he was very, very critical of Muslims themselves. Okay, so this is the most important thing. Reconstruction is different from reform. Reform means that you change basically a lot of the very understanding of the religion from the very fundamentals of it. Iqbal didn't want to engage in the fundamentals. For him, engaging into the fundamentals means that he was entering into the terrain of the ulama, and he doesn't want to be called that. Engaging into revivalism, on the other hand, which was the language of Al-Afghani, would mean that he was engaging more into political solutions. That was the rallying call of Afghani. And he talks about Afghani. And he said that Afghani had too much politics. That's why he couldn't reform the religion enough. So reconstruction is another thing. Regardless, even if he says that reconstruction is different from reform and revival, when you read the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam, it has aspects of reform and revival in it. So we have to be fair. He says that he's different, but what he writes in the book is actually something else. So always remember this, do not judge a book by its cover. Do not. Why? Don't judge a book by its cover, because covers and titles conceals, obscures the real objective of the authors. Okay? So that's why he says in the Reconstruction in page 78, the man, he says, and this is where he criticized Al-Afghani, the man, however, who fully realized the importance and immensity of the task of reform and reconstruction, and whose deep insight into the inner meaning of the history of Muslim thought and life, combined with a broad vision engendered by his wide experience of men and manners, would have made him a living link between the past and the future, was Jamaluddin Al-Afghani. Then he criticized Afghani. He says, if his indefatigable but divided energy could have devoted itself entirely to Islam as a system of human belief and conduct, the world of Islam, intellectually speaking, would have been on a more solid ground today. In short, he's saying Afghani had too much politics that he forgot to write. And this is the crisis of good thinkers of our time. You spend too much time doing the work on the ground that we forgot to document the very ideas that we need to push our societies forward. Why do we do that? Because writing is hard, doing is easy. Tola? Is that correct? Why is it correct? Now have ChatGPT even easier. Writing is difficult because you have to think. And the Afghani, one of the reasons of the split between Afghani and Abdu was about this. Afghani always believed in the continuous revolution until the liberation of the Muslim world from the shackles of colonialism. Abdu say, no, if you keep on fighting, when are you going to build? So that's why Abdu says no, sorry, to his master. He went back to Egypt and built institutions. Of course, he had a broken heart before he died. He died of cancer, basically, Abdu, precisely because he couldn't reform the institutions. Needless to say, Iqbal is trying to say, tell us here from the story of Afghani that if you don't write, you cannot change the future of Islamic thought. Institutions alone is not enough to push the civilization forward. And this is the most important. So just to explain why he used the word reconstruction, to reconstruct is to build not from ground zero, but from the existing pillars and foundations. So he took from the reformists these ideas. That means you don't start from nothing, as we say in philosophy, ex nihilo. That means you start from a vacuum. And this is the Nietzsche's way of doing it. Right? Nietzsche will say that there is no morality, there's nothing, there's no God, there's nothing. And I'm going to start from nothing and to think of something from that. John Paul Sartre wrote a book about this, Being and Nothingness, right? Where he argues in the same position that you can actually begin thought not from thought, but simply from your own life experience. And he said it is not possible in Islam. Islam is a tree that has grown. And you cannot just say that you want to start from nothing and build. Rather, you must take from whatever that is there and try to reconstruct it again. The analogy now that is being used much in Iranian videos is Lego, right? So it's like Lego. You don't break everything up and just turn it into a whole chaos, but rather you build slowly and slowly and slowly until the thing becomes something, making the region and its associated ideas more current and relevant in response to the pervasive effects of colonialism. Now Arif comes into the story. His question does not anticipate my slides. I don't know how that happened. It must have been kashaf from somewhere. Now I want to explain this, okay? When you read the Reconstruction, this is my own bid'ah, innovation, you must understand that Iqbal is concerned with the pendulum of time. Pendulum of time. The book swings from the past to the present into the future, and that's why it's confusing. In one paragraph, he talks about the past. In another paragraph, he says what we can achieve in the future. And then he goes back to the present. Which texts follow this kind of telling things? Past, future, present, all conflated into one narrative. Which texts follow this kind of style? The Quran, right? The Quran will tell you one story, right? Let's take Surah Al-Kahf as one example. Starts with the story of the people of the cave, and then suddenly move into the story of Musa, and then move into the story of Zulkarnain, and then move into the story of us today. It moves from time. So you have to read the Reconstruction as this. It is a pendulum of time that he's talking about. It's almost like watching Back to the Future. Now you are in future, then you go back to the past, then you go back to the present again. And then, like I said just now, the nature of the book, if you go to the left, it's not purely historical. It is not a historical text. It is not deeply philosophical because he's not engaging into high-level philosophy, nor is it academic. It is not entirely very academic. And that's why he's always criticized as being not so scholarly by the Western scholars. Because if you read the Reconstruction, there are not many footnotes, number one. Number two, he does not explain the very terminologies that he used. He doesn't. Okay? And that all of this brings into an engaged discussion to move the condition of Muslims and the path forward. So we need to read it like that. Right? Read it like a text that goes into so many different directions. But when you look it as a whole, as a canvas writ large, you can understand what this man is actually trying to say. And he's actually, after all of the flowery language that he's trying to say, he's actually trying to make only one point, which he does in 200 pages. It happens to all writers of books. Okay? What is the one point that he was trying to make? On the Muslim ego. The Urdu word that he used, actually it's from Persian, I was told, as I was reading about it, is the word Khudi. He was concerned with the word Khudi. Khudi. Khudi, which is translated into ego or self or selfhood. Okay? But before that, any questions so far?
There's one question on the YouTube chat, which is by Sazani. How can Iqbal's critique of Western epistemology be specifically used to inform our dependence of it in present social science, even as we speak of Islamic thought and civilization?
Critique of epistemology.
Yes, then how we can use that to inform.
Okay. Well, okay. The first thing I should qualify is that Iqbal wasn't concerned with social sciences per se. In fact, he was criticizing it. He was very skeptical of Western social sciences and philosophy and psychology. He said that most of these behavioral psychologists actually uses a priori theories in order to make conclusions about human nature. So he conclude in the Reconstruction, I didn't put the slide here, that much of Western psychology and social sciences are actually speculations turned scholarly, which is very stinging, right? So even if you read Marx, Durkheim, Weber, all the great thinkers, he said that their starting point is the assumption that human beings are by nature conflicted. They start with that. They don't start with the whole idea that human nature are, at least in Islam, pure by nature. And that's why from their theory of conflict, their theory of clash, they come up with all of these ideas about class divisions, about this whole idea of anomie, and so forth and so forth. So how he can inform social science? He can tell us, what he has done is to tell us first the problems of ideology that has crept into modern social sciences. And now a lot of Western scholars are also criticizing Western social sciences. Read the book by this American philosopher. His name is Anthony Appiah. And Anthony Appiah just published a book, just came out last year, where he talks about how the great social scientists were all very concerned with religion. And he says that their assumption of religion to begin with was flawed. I forgot the title of the book. Harith later check for me. The author's name is Anthony Appiah, Appiah. The book just came out. And he was talking about Max Weber, Durkheim, and others, and how all of Augustus Comte, so I think, and how all of these assumptions are actually, the starting point is not scholarly. The starting point is actually, okay, the title of the book is Captive Gods, Religion and the Rise of Social Science. It's a very good book where he criticizes many of the social scientists, ala how Iqbal has done it. Okay, any other question?
Prof. Khairudin.
Yes,
Assalamualaikum.
yes, Prof. Salam.
Okay, don't take me wrong. I am not against the Iqbal. But if you turn the coin the other side about the Iqbal, I'm supporter of him, by the way. Iqbal is very controversial in many ways. Have you read Kulliyatul Iqbal, by the way? The Kulliyatul Iqbal, actually, once it gets translated in English, there's a lot of twists. And that actually tries to make the Western narrative. Number one, Iqbal is blamed for division of the Muslim power in the subcontinent. Because Muslims were equally, if not better, good in the subcontinent, but because his idea of the state divided the Muslim into Hindu state and the Muslim state, number one. Number two, now the same Muslim state divided into Bangladesh and Pakistan. So according to some critiques, that Iqbal, who the state was born 50 years in his mind before the real division of the countries into three. So Muslim lost the power. Otherwise, they would have controlled the whole subcontinent, provided they would have been together. Number one. Number two, Khudi, even many ulama and scholars, they condemn him because of looking forward as if he's trying to step into the kibr and something like that. So that's where the many ulama, they were having a problem with him. And most of them, they disagreed with him originally, and that carried forward for the future because of shikwa and jawab shikwa. So when they put the shikwa, they all have a wall up against him. But only when he responded with the jawab shikwa, then people, 50% of them subsidized, 50% they did not until end. And now you're talking about philosopher and talking the activist. I think Sir Sayyid and Iqbal, they are the two different Muslim tall personalities in the subcontinent. Sir Sayyid was activist. Now you see the Aligarh Muslim University, where the Prof Imtiaz graduated from, its contribution intellectually, and the Iqbal's contribution for dividing the Muslim and unity in the continent. So that's why there are a number of issues that, so if you turn the coin the other side of the Iqbal, then Iqbal is very controversial.
Yeah.
With due respect, I'm not against him.
Great points, Prof. And duly acknowledged. Iqbal, like I said, I begin with Iqbal has been described in so many different ways. But I want to address the first question on Pakistan. The charge against him is unfair because it's post facto. Post facto in philosophy means that you are attributing something that has happened after the person had said it many, many years before the thing actually happened. Pakistan was established when he had died. Pakistan was established in 1948. Iqbal had died many years before that. Iqbal wasn't involved deeply into the creation of the state. He was involved deeply into the conceptualization of what the state was supposed to be. As far as all of the experts who are studying Iqbal had said, was that Iqbal did not say that the Hindus and Muslims are to be two different peoples. He didn't say that. He said that he was concerned with domain. Right? And we all know, in any country where anyone is a minority, and there is a majority, that the majority will always have an edge over the minority, save some very special circumstances where the minority have economic power and the majority do not have it. But at least, and he mentioned it actually in one of his writings, I forgot which one was it, in one of his political essays and speeches, he said that the trouble with Muslims in India is that they have nothing during his time. They didn't have political power. The ulama were fighting one another, and that was his greatest unhappiness. And more importantly, they didn't have economic power. They had nothing. And precisely from this very strategic and practical side at looking at the condition on Muslims, that he said that only when we have our own domain and later on became a state. There's a good book actually on this called The Muslim Zion by this Pakistani scholar. His name is Faisal Devji, who mentioned about this. And he actually mentioned about Iqbal a little bit. He has another essay on Iqbal as well, that the attribution of the establishment of Pakistan to Iqbal is very unfair, because the idea of Pakistan in the eyes of Iqbal was different. Still, we must also acknowledge that he was the one who came out with this idea to begin with. Yeah, he came out with it. His problem was he didn't explain it well enough, number one. Number two, he wasn't involved in the nitty-gritties of how the state is supposed to be established. He could have, because he knew Jinnah personally. In fact, he met Maududi personally when Maududi was very young. One can say Jama'at-e Islami wouldn't have been established without prior engagement with Iqbal, to be fair. Now, the second point that you brought up about the engagement with the ulama charge against Iqbal in many ways are quite fair, because Iqbal, as I mentioned in the very beginning, has always been ambiguous about what his positions are. In fact, I told you guys to read Stray Reflections. You might end up finishing Stray Reflections hating Iqbal. I'm telling you. After you read him, you realize, man, this guy doesn't make up his mind. Right? And that's precisely the point that I'm trying to make. That he is so slippery.
To some extent, some of them has gone to say that Iqbal was a new Muslim.
Yeah, he was.
He has no idea about the Islam
Yeah.
per se.
Yes.
So there are so many other things I
Yeah.
don't want to cover here.
Correct.
But I just want to show you the other side of the coin.
Totally. Fair enough. But some of the Deoband even call him Alama. In fact, in Pakistan, they call him Alama Iqbal. Alama means ulama. He's part of the alim class. But the point being that whatever arguments that we have against him, or however the ulama is against him, I want to tell you that the ulama was also against Abdu, who was an alim. During the time of Imam Ghazali in Islamic Spain, without you knowing this, Ihya Ulumuddin was burnt. The Muslims in Spain were banned from reading Ihya Ulumuddin. Does that make Al-Ghazali a heretic? Ibn Tumat said no reading of Imam Ghazali. He is a heretic, right? So Iqbal suffers from the same thing. The difference between Iqbal and Ghazali and Rumi and others is that Iqbal went into the depths of Western philosophy, took some water from the lake of Western philosophy, drank it, and didn't piss it enough. Right? That's my understanding. He could have gotten rid of more of it from his system. He didn't. Why he didn't? Because the Reconstruction was meant for the Western audience. And that's why when I was reading it, I was talking to my friend about it. I said, this man could have made things so simple. Right? Because after I read him, now I'm writing about Muhammad Asad. Muhammad Asad made the very same point as Iqbal. In one paragraph, Iqbal had to make it in one whole chapter. Still, he didn't make the point. Right? Because he was trying very hard. And this was the problem with many thinkers of that time. Very hard to make the Western philosophers feel that he was at the same level, if not better than them. Okay, so we need to understand. That's why I begin just now. The positionality. Where was he positioning himself? Maududi, which we're going to talk about in the fifth session, and that's going to be quite fiery, because when we talk about Maududi, it's almost like Yawmul Qiyamah. Was very clear about what he stands for. Right? Why was he very clear? Because to him, I don't care what the West thinks. The West can think their own way. I have my thought. Iqbal didn't have that. He was always at the threshold of thinking. And that's why he was like going back and forth. Okay, a little bit of Heidegger, a little bit of Schopenhauer, a little bit of here and a little bit of there. And then let's just like frame it all together. We'll come up with something very special. Sometimes he gets trapped. Sometimes he comes out with certain brilliance that we can take from him. Okay? So don't take this as, oh, now I'm not going to read Iqbal. Because some alim say, kafir. Ghazali had the same problem. Abdu had the same problem. Every good thinker has the same. If a thinker is not criticized in the most harshest way, there's no point reading him. He's just producing ISI and Scopus journal articles. Okay, that's a side joke. Okay, so Iqbal was concerned with Khudi. Khudi means the ego. And he was concerned with the fall of the Muslim ego. So in Asrar al-Khudi, as Professor Imtiaz was saying just now, The Secrets of the Self, also a very problematic book if you don't read it properly. And with some help, it can be quite, not dangerous, quite misleading sometimes. He says that the self is the thing that is problematic in the Muslim civilization. That the Muslim self is the key factor for decline and development. This is where he turns the table around when he talks about Jamaluddin al-Afghani. Jamaluddin al-Afghani said that in order to change the Muslim civilization, you need to change the structures and the systems first. Hence, you need to bring back the Caliphate. Later on, his Tahrir used the same idea. The Caliphate come back, everybody will become powerful again. Iqbal say that's nonsense. Even if the Caliphate come back, and he mentioned it in the Reconstruction, and the Khalif is corrupt, the Muslims will be equally corrupt. So he said no systems, no structures first. The first thing is the self. And he goes back to the Quran, which Abdu also uses this for his book. Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. He says, clean yourself, reclaim yourself, then you can change society. So he says in the Reconstruction, and again, just to quote Prof. Khalik here, this is the good part of the Reconstruction. The nature of the ego, he said, is such that in spite of its capacity to respond to other egos, it is self-centered. So go back to the point Prof made just now. Kibr. The problem with the ego is that he said human beings by nature, every one of us, is in a sense arrogating ourselves. We always want to see that we are special. We always want to see that we are different and possesses a private circuit of individuality, excluding all other egos other than itself. In this alone consists its reality as an ego. So that's why the nafs in itself, according to him, has problems, but it has potential at the same time. The problem with the nafs is that it is always looking inward rather than just inward and outward. Okay, so he goes on to say, man, therefore, in whom egohood has reached its relative perfection, occupies a genuine place in the heart of divine creative energy. He says when the ego, the self, the Khudi, the nafs have reached perfection, and this is where it sounds very Sufi, Insanul Kamil. He takes a bit from Sufism, although he disagrees with Al-Jili and others. He says that possesses a much higher degree reality than things around him. Of all the creations of God, he alone is capable of consciously participating in the creative life of his maker. So he's basically trying to say that the ego has issues with itself. And the only way for the ego to not have issues with itself is to dislodge itself from itself. Faham tak? The ego has to dislodge itself from itself. That means you must come out from your own ego and link your ego to who? Link your ego to the maker, whom he calls as the ultimate ego. He used the word the ultimate ego. Until and unless Muslims can move away from being concerned with only changing themselves, but try to be close to Allah and know that Allah is the source of all change, that he can become a change maker in society. It's very powerful. It is actually the Sufi theory of fana and the Sufi theory of muraqabah, muhasabah, everything. From Sufism, he just pack it all together and says that until and unless we can understand what Allah wills and what Allah wants us to do, we cannot achieve anything for ourselves. I repeat what I mentioned just now. So he says, why the Muslim ego has fallen, why the Muslim ego has become weak. The book is trying to diagnose this problem. He says it's because of Sufism. So this is the irony. He takes from Sufism, he criticizes Sufism. He takes from the West, he criticizes the West. He takes from the ulama, he criticizes the ulama. He's always doing that back and forth. And he says that Sufism has led to quietism, you don't question systems, has become irrational, has become mystic, and according to him, everything has become like this in Sufism because of Ibn Arabi. And he blames Ibn Arabi for a lot of problems in society. On this part, he leans more towards Ibn Taymiyyah, and he quotes Ibn Taymiyyah. He says that Ibn Arabi, through his idea of this whole idea of the union of God, makes Muslim weak. We can argue against him because William Shittick has wrote many books about Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi is not only someone who founded Wahdatul Wujud. By the way, just as an aside, Wahdatul Wujud as a terminology was used by who? Who coined Wahdatul Wujud? Ibn Taymiyyah was the one who coined Wahdatul Wujud to explain what Ibn Arabi was thinking. Ibn Arabi didn't use the word Wahdatul Wujud. The point is that he's trying to say that the ideology of Wahdatul Wujud crept into Muslim mind and sensibilities, making Muslims very, very weak. So he says the spirit of total otherness, total otherworldliness. So he's not saying that Akhirah is not important. But the problem with the Sufis, he said, they only are concerned with the otherworldly. In later Sufis, I put it in red over there because he's not criticizing the Sufi tradition as a whole. So we need to be very careful with this when you read Iqbal. Because people come away with this whole idea that he's saying that all of Tasawwuf is wrong. No, he's not saying that. He said that later Sufism. What is later Sufism? What is later Sufism? Can somebody tell me? What's later Sufism? Sufism after the time of the Salafus Saleh. Hasan al-Basri also practiced some kind of tasawwuf. The early Sufyan al-Thawri and others also practiced some kind of ihsan, itqan, muraqabah, qana'a, and so forth. He says that the later Sufis, the people who have merged mysticism, obscured man's vision of a very important aspect of Islam as a social polity and offering a prospect of unrestrained thought on its speculative side. So he was against speculation about what we don't know and seem to think that we know. It attracted and finally absorbed the best minds in Islam. The Muslim state was thus left generally in the hands of, and I like to use the word that he used, intellectual mediocrities. So who was he criticizing? Intellectual mediocrities. Who was he criticizing? The ulama. That's why the ulama, when they read the Reconstruction, they felt it. Because Iqbal was telling them, you don't understand the tradition, and you explain the tradition in a weak way, and that's why now in India, we have become so weak. You are intellectually mediocre, and the unthinking masses of Islam, having no personalities of a higher caliber to guide them, found their security only in blindly following the schools. Now, this is why I criticize Iqbal, because he wants to criticize most of the ulama of his time. He couldn't see that there were many ulama who were equally sharing a lot of the ideas that he had. In his credit, he praised Shah Waliullah, Ahmad Sirhindi, and other scholars that understood Sufism in a different way. But sometimes he went a little bit too far and said that most of the Sufis didn't understand that Sufism ought not to be otherworldly. Okay, so this is an issue of stylistic. Sometimes when you read reformist texts, many of them write in a very embellishing way, or hyperbole, as we say, hyperbolic descriptions. Why they use hyperbole? Because when people don't understand that something is important, you need to hit them hard for them to change. Okay, I'm just joking.
And this is where the major issue is.
Yeah,
because, I mean, though some of you here understand Urdu, the second, part of his poetry, Khudi, Khudi ko kar buland itna ki har taqdeer se pehle. So far, so good. खुदा बंदे से पूछे कि बता तेरी रजा क्या है, as if the creation wants to supersede the power of Almighty.
Correct.
The Almighty asks him, what do you want? As if Almighty depends on the person. So that's where created a lot of misleading
Exactly.
interpretations of the Iqbal on that part of Khudi.
Yep.
But as you rightly said, new Muslim, always very emotional. And then also whatever he picks up, then he condemns it back again. So that is very typical of Iqbal.
Yeah.
And I mean, just to pre-caution, not the warn,
Yeah.
to our young minds, when you read between both the side of the coins, so that you can figure out exactly his philosophy and his contribution. But no doubt about it, Iqbal, among the Muslim scholars of 20th century, was one of the great minds.
Yes. So that's the one, Sufism. Then we go to the second one, and we have question and answers again. The second is the incorporation of Greek philosophy into the heart of Islam. And this is where he departs from other revivalists, because the earlier revivalists wanted to bring in back Greek philosophy, because there is a school of thought, especially Abdu, who felt that Greek philosophy had something to contribute into the heart of Islam. Iqbal was against Greek philosophy. He said that the scholars of the past who took on Greek philosophical thinking, they committed the error of obfuscating the vision of the Quran. They understood the Quran in a way that was more philosophical than Quranic. And that's why he says, Ghazali, and this is why he criticized Imam Ghazali, remain on the whole a follower of Aristotle in logic. This is where he took from Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah said that Ghazali entered into the wells of philosophy and never came out. And Iqbal said the same thing. That sometimes, he said, in the past, when the Muslims were engaging with philosophy, they end up using the very tools that the philosophers use. And because of that, they did not understand the Quran in the correct way. The third factor, he said, that caused the fall of the ego is that Muslims in his time until now was very much engulfed by modernity and materialism. He says, thus wholly overshadowed by the results of his intellectual activity, the modern man has ceased to live soulfully. So he says that modernity has removed from modern man his soul. So go back to what I said just now. The ruh has been forgotten. In the domain of thought, he is living in open conflict with himself. And in the domain of economic and political life, he is living in open conflict with others. He finds himself unable to control his ruthless egoism and his infinite goal hunger. What has happened to us in modernity? Alhaakumut takathur hatta zurtumul maqabir. We are chasing and chasing and chasing until we die, and we forget that we are still chasing. And he says that which gradually killing all higher striving in him and bringing him nothing but life weariness, absorbed in the fact that is to say the optically present source of sensation, he is entirely cut off from the unplumbed depths of his own being. So he says modernity and materialism, much like Sufism and others, is the other side of the coin, has resulted to the modern man forgetting his real purpose in his life. So that's why the Muslim ego has become wayward and has lost itself. Okay? Any questions so far before we talk about how he tried to reconstruct the Muslim ego?
There's a question online. It says that Iqbal believed the finality of the prophethood with Prophet Muhammad signified the humanity had reached a stage of intellectual and mental maturity where it no longer required new revelation. So he wants to ask what does Iqbal means by this, because this implies that the present age does not need revelation and prophecy. So is this view the most dangerous, such that it restricts legislation to revelation, which cannot be replaced by absolute reason?
I don't know what the question is implying, but Iqbal make it a big point that Rasulullah SAW is the Khatimul Anbiya. That means he's the seal of the prophets, which means that after Rasulullah SAW, there will be no more revelation. The fact that there will be no more revelation doesn't mean that human beings will not be guided by people who can be sent by Allah to guide them. Supra revelation. And this is what Iqbal is trying to say. vis-a-vis the ayat of the Quran, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. We do not, Allah says in the Quran in Surah Al-Isra, we do not punish any group of people unless we have bring down to them Rasula. Rasula means someone who gives them a reminder. So Iqbal is trying to say, even if there's no more revelation, prophethood is final, there will be people who are always reminding the communities vis-a-vis the final revelation that is there. So that doesn't mean that the process of it implies that even though the process of revelation has ended, the relevance of the revelation has not ended. This is what he's trying to say. Okay? Any more questions from anyone? On Sufism, on materialism?
There's also another question, which is critics argued that Iqbal's Khudi is too heavily derived from Nietzsche, simply dressed in Islamic vocabulary. Is it generally Islamic or Western idea in disguise?
Well, I disagree that he got it from Nietzsche. In fact, if you read the Reconstruction, he criticized Nietzsche quite a lot. But the idea of Khudi is actually mostly derived from the Quran, the idea of nafs, but it's actually really derived from Persian ideas of the self. He uses the word ego, and this is why I'm a bit unhappy with the book. He has talked about the Khudi in so many other things, other places, Asrar-i Khudi and so forth. Why didn't he use the word Khudi in this book? Why? Why did he use the word ego? This is a question I'm always asking. Why? Because he wanted the Westerners to understand this and bridge the book to his other books. That's why, again, I tell you, when we read books, we must see it as a strategy to bridge certain ideas sometimes. That's why, go back to Ghazali. Ghazali wrote the book Maqasid al-Falasifa. He wrote the principles of philosophy, and people criticize him. People say that you become a heretic now, systemizing philosophy for philosophers. But it sets a stage for him to write the Tahafut al-Falasifa. So the same is it when I was thinking about it. Oh, he didn't want to use the word Khudi because he wants to bring the Western audience and the Muslim audience to all his other texts, his corpus of writing. That's why the Khudi is actually a Muslim come Persian word that he had used but tried to avoid in this book. Okay? Any other last question before we talk about the reconstruction of the Khudi or the Muslim ego, or any general points? Any one of you hates Iqbal now? No, such a difficult person to understand. I'm telling you, I suffered reading this book. I suffered a lot because I was like telling myself, like, why didn't this man make it so simple when his ideas are pretty quite elementary, but he didn't want it to be like that. Okay. Yeah, Prof.
When you say that, that's very correct. See, in India, Pakistan, Iqbal is known for his poetry, but not for his book, which Professor is talking about, because they don't understand what he was trying to reconstruct. So everybody knows Iqbal by memory, as Professor Khalik would know, and they memorize it, and they feel so rejuvenated to take up Tajdeed and all that. But when you get and ask them about philosophy of Iqbal,
nobody wants to talk about
no one.
Yeah.
It is all blank.
Yeah. Yes.
A question on you mentioned that Iqbal still maintained the fundamental of Islam, especially in the theology that he quoted Ash'ari theology a lot in his book. But since he tried to synthesize many of Western philosophy from Western philosopher, do you think when he uses this Western philosopher where they also touch upon metaphysics, theology, do you think it also affects his understanding of theology?
Well, okay, this is another so-called lecture altogether. Iqbal's theology, which is a scary topic to talk about, because as Prof. Halik was saying just now, when you read his pronouncements about God, right? God sounds a little bit human. And I really seriously don't want to get there. Yeah. So I stick to the reconstruction because his poems, like I said, can make you feel that he is actually pantheistic in ways of thinking. Even though he criticized Ibn Arabi, he sounds like Ibn Arabi, right? And this is the thing that I think, I don't know who had written about Iqbal's theology. So far, none, you know, none. Because everybody's scared. Yeah, you might just expose something that you don't want to hear. But at least from the Reconstruction point of view, he was quite clear. His theology sounded really similar to Shah Waliullah. So if you read Shah Waliullah's book on the Hujjatul Baligha, I read it in translation basically, and you compare it with Iqbal's Reconstruction, the idea of God is almost the same, right? This omnipresent God, this whole idea that God is transcendent, the whole idea that God is the ultimate ego as against all the other smaller egos. The distinction is made, right? Yeah. You want to say something? Okay, all right. Can I move on? Okay.
Can I say something here?
Yes, please.
Iqbal is present in this room. Now,
Mhm.
I want to tell you something very surprising.
Seriously.
I got a message from a professor in Sweden who has sent me a poster of Iqbal. He says today is the day death anniversary of Iqbal.
Inshallah.
I'll share this to you. And what Iqbal says is what you're doing.
Mhm.
Following my departure, they shall spread my message proclaiming a self-conscious soul has turned the entire cosmos upside down. Professor Emin does not know that you are going to talk about it.
Yeah,
I just received this here.
that's right. So scary, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
So
God.
Iqbal is here.
Okay. I don't even know that today is the anniversary or whatever.
Death anniversary.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So let's talk about his reconstructing of the ego. So the Quran, this is where he sounds quite orthodox, right? He says that the Muslim ego can only be constructed through the Quran and not any other text. And this is where he's in a sense safe to read. He says that the issue is how the Quran has been read. The Quran, according to him, view life as regenerating. That means life must always be in a continuous state of change. And he goes on to say that each generation, guided but unhampered, again, this is where the ulama was angry with him for, by the work of its predecessors, should be permitted to solve its own problem. So he disagreed that the understanding of the Quran by the past scholars ought to determine how the present scholars understand the Quran. And he says that the Quran is an activistic text. It is not a devotional text. It is a text that calls us to read, to memorize, to be inspired, but more importantly, to do something. So go back to the ayats that I cite just now, that Iqbal also cites, that the Quran never talks about iman decoupled from amal salih. Innal ladina amanu wa amilu salihat. It's always coupled together. And this, according to Iqbal, differentiates the Quran from all other scriptures. That there is no belief unless you do something. And this, in social science, we use the word praxis. If you read the book by Wilfred Cantwell Smith, he's an Orientalist, right? Who wrote an amazing book called The Meaning and End of Religion, which you must read. He has one chapter on Islam where he says Islam is different from other religions because Islam is not an orthodoxy. It doesn't have an orthodoxy. He says Islam is an autopraxy. It is a belief that emphasizes on action. It is a belief that is refined through action. So try and Google this word called praxis. Praxis. Islam is a praxis. And this is what Iqbal is trying to say, that the Quran is a praxis. It is not an abstract relic. And that's why the Quran is an enabler of the Muslim ego. He says that the Quran encourages the Muslim ego to develop an empirical attitude. So I want to go into this a little bit. What does he mean by this? He says that Muslim in his time think only from the basis of speculation, number one, imagination, number two, and last but not least, simply from inherited knowledge. An empirical attitude means that the Quran encourages us to observe, to listen, and to reflect and do something with it. Inna fi khalqis samawati wal ard wa ikhtilafil layli wan nahari the ayatil liulil albab. So liulil albab is the one that he emphasizes. People who think. When do they think? Alladhina yadhkuruna Allaha qiyama wa qu'uda wa ala junubihim wa yatafakkaruna fi khalqis samawati wal ard. Then after they have observed the sun and the moon and the movement of the sky, of the day and the night, then they say, Rabbana ma khalaqta hadha batilan subhanaka faqina adhaban nar. So he says that when you read the Quran, you realize the Quran is telling Muslims, observe, observe, observe. And that's not enough. After you observe, experiment, verify. That means he says that the Quran encourages us to be scientific, which then comes to the conclusion that one cannot be and cannot have a Muslim ego if one is stupid. It is very powerful. No Muslim, by design, unless they have a learning difficulty, even so, can be stupid. Why? Because the Quran, the moment you read it, encourages you to be empirical, to always be observant, to think. It is an enabler. Everything is a sign. So there is two signs of Allah: the signs that is the ayah of Allah, and the signs that is in nature. And he talks about it. So he says that Islam stands midway between optimism and pessimism. It is meliorism, which recognizes a growing universe and is animated by the hope of man's eventual victory over evil. The Quran tells us again and again that good must fight evil. And he says that the Quran is all about that. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. Don't be close to zina because it is a bad way and the most distasteful way. It is always trying to fight evil again and again and again. That's why when we read Surah Al-Baqarah, it starts with the categorizations of people. Innal ladina kafaru, then in the munafiq, and then go on to describe the people who believe. Okay, so he says that the Quran enables the ego, and this is where, go back to Western philosophy, he takes a little bit from this thinker called Henry Bergson. He says, taking from Henry Bergson, that the Quran teaches Muslims to be creative. He says, no human being can know and have control of his destiny. Takdir is almost set. But the fact that your takdir has been determined, according to Iqbal, the Quran tells us that the Muslim ego should still be creative when it recognizes that it shapes its own experience of time. So as I mentioned just now, time is determined by Allah. When you will be born, when you will die, what will be given to you in terms of rizq, who you will be marrying, that you don't decide. But the fact that you do not get to decide doesn't mean that you are denied of being creative. So this is where he takes Western philosophy and reads the Quran differently. He says that Muslim ego becomes a shaper of time. He cannot change time. He only shapes it, and not a mere recipient of it, and acts in ways that are guided by Quranic precepts. The only way for us to do things properly in our lives is, and this is where almost he sounds like Sayyid Qutb, to be in the fi dhilalil Quran, to always be in the shade of the Quran and let the Quran speaks to us and inspire us again and again. Now, secondly, I'm going to finish here already, that Iqbal says that the only way for the Muslim ego to be reconstructed is to reinstate what he calls as religious experience. During his time, agnosticism, atheism, and naturalism, go back to Sayyid Ahmad Khan. Just now, Prof. Khalid talked about Sayyid Ahmad Khan. Sayyid Ahmad Khan was criticized by Jamaluddin al-Afghani as people who follow the naturalists, because Sayyid Ahmad Khan believed that science can discover the truth. That was his belief, Sayyid Ahmad Khan. And Aligarh was built on that philosophy. Iqbal disagrees with it. Iqbal says that naturalism, agnosticism, atheism, these are the frames by which Westerners use to understand Islam, and that causes the Muslim ego to be corrupt. To the West, according to him, religion is essential because it provides the necessary illusions or coping mechanisms for navigating existential uncertainty. So he says the reason why we Muslims have lost our understanding of our ego is because we treat Islam as a religion. Okay? Religion comes from the Latin word religio, which means belief. Right? He says this is erroneous. Islam is not a belief. Islam is an experience. The Sufis call it dhauk, to taste. You need to taste it. You need to do it. You need to have amal. You need to have ihsan in order for you to know Islam. He uses the word religious experience. Where he got the word from? From this man called William James. William James had this book called Varieties of Religious Experience. And Iqbal takes the word and understand it in Islamic terms. He says, and this is where Prof. Imtiaz, he whacks Nietzsche. He says, in modern Europe, Nietzsche, whose life and activity form, at least to us Easterns, an exceedingly interesting problem in religious psychology, was endowed with some sort of constitutional equipment for such an undertaking. Okay, first he praises Nietzsche. He says that Nietzsche is such a powerful thinker from Germany, and he has all these mental instruments to make us understand a lot of things. Then he said, his mental history is not without parallel in the history of Eastern Sufism, that a really imperative vision of a divine in man did come to him. He says that Nietzsche did understand God in some ways, cannot be denied. I call his vision imperative because it appears to have given him a kind of prophetic mentality, which by some kind of technique aims at turning its visions into permanent life forces. Sounds very difficult, but basically in one word, in one sentence, what he's trying to say is that Nietzsche has the strength of thinking and the power of intelligence that he could understand the problems of modern life and he could discern what God is. This is what Iqbal is trying to say. Nietzsche understood what God is all about. What did he do? He understands. And he says, that is precisely the problem. He only understands God. He doesn't want to experience it. And this is the Western problem. They know religion, they appreciate religion, they study religion, but what? They do not want to experience religion. So he goes on to say, yet Nietzsche was a failure. Very powerful. Anybody dare to write like this? Right? And his failure was mainly due to his intellectual progenitors such as Schumpeter, Darwin, and Lange, whose influence completely blinded him to the real significance of his vision. Instead of looking for a spiritual rule that would develop the divine even in the plebeian and thus open up before him an infinite future, Nietzsche was driven to seek a realization of his vision in such schemes as aristocratic radicalism, the idea of the Superman. Nietzsche was the one who came out with the idea of the Superman. He imagined that there is this person whom we can produce through modernity and the excesses of modernity that has superpowers. Now it becomes all these Marvel and DC heroes that you watch. This is all Nietzsche's idea. Why he came out with this idea of Superman? He thinks that men can reach the powers of the divine. And that's where he got lost. That's why Nietzsche died trying to save a dog that was drowning. And he drowned and died. Right? He has this very interesting thing where he says that it is all too human. But he's trying to create a superhuman. And this is where Iqbal criticizes him. And Iqbal takes from William James and say that the problem with Nietzsche is that he did not experience religion. And how do you experience religion? Iqbal says, through prayers and contemplation. So I would like everyone also to read the book by Professor Malik Badri, who was with ISTEC. And the title of the book is Contemplation, a psycho-spiritual study. Please read the book. It's a beautiful book. I love it very, very much because he puts in a lot of studies of people who does zikir and how zikir can sometimes solve mental problems actually. And he says that when Iqbal says that when Muslims pray and contemplate, it can propel the Muslim ego to engage in world-making and world-shaking act, Again, very activistic. Being religious makes one spiritually grounded, intellectually attuned to development in science, and politically creative. So he argues against the West. He says the West thinks that the more religious one becomes, the more one gets into prayer and contemplation and litanies and zikr, the less intellectual they become. Iqbal says it's the reverse. The more you are steeped in religion, the more intellectual you become. The more you can appreciate your religion and experience it, the more scientific you become. So don't, according to him, follow Nietzsche or the Sufis. The later Sufis, not the current Sufis, the later Sufis, right? Because both of them lost their way. One don't want to experience religion. The other one experience religion and forget the world, right? And both are wrong. So I just want to end before we get the final set of questions. We have about 10 minutes with two quotations from Iqbal that summarizes the entire book. A wrong concept misleads the understanding. A wrong deed degrades the whole man and may eventually demolish the structure of the human ego. So, iman, amal. Iman, amal. What you think affects everything that you do. Ilmu, qabla, amal. Right? The second one is the ultimate aim of the ego is not to see something. This is the Western idea of what it is. To discern. It is to be something. Right? To be something that matters. And this is where Iqbal reminds us that it's not enough for you to analyze the world. Going back to Marx, the point is to change yourself. Because Marx says the point is to change the world. The point is to change it. Iqbal says no. The point is to change yourself. When you change your ego, you engage in a world-making, world-changing act. So I'm going to end here. Let's get the last questions. Please disagree with me. Okay. Anyone? Yep.
Assalamualaikum. You mentioned about Iqbal using the word religious experience, but did he ever mention the word Zaw at all, or is that only his English writing?
Did he mention the word?
Zaw at all in any of his writing?
Zaw, not that I know of. Maybe in his poems, perhaps in Urdu.
Okay.
He did use it in another word, but in the Reconstruction, no.
Okay.
But he did mention that the Sufis engage in certain acts that lead to that states.
Okay. Then my question is this, because you also mentioned that he likes and appreciates Rumi, and we all know Rumi is an aesthetic Sufi. That means he's deep into experience of Zawq, Fana, and all that. So what is Iqbal's own description of his own some sort of that sort of religious experience? Although maybe he didn't use the word Fana or Baka and all that, can you describe his own description of his own experience that is above the normal threshold?
At least in the Reconstruction, he does not describe it, his own religious experience. But in Khudi, he did talk about it, where in that sense, I feel that he's harsh towards the Sufis, but he's actually one with them. Right? So when you read The Secrets of the Self, he actually sounds like a Sufi. But his idea of Sufism is not the kind of Sufism that gets into speculations over the realities of God, over the realities of life, but that one must always be in a deep state of contemplation. And that is as far as I can say when it comes to his whole idea. The other thing is, one needs to understand that Iqbal does not aim to be like the Sufis. This we need to understand, because throughout his life, he is almost trying to distance himself from that tradition, which to him, at least in India and Pakistan, were stifling the project of Reconstruction. So we need to understand this too, because he was engaging with a group of people whom he felt was degenerated. And that's why he didn't use their terminologies as much in the book. Okay, any more? Yeah.
Come, Prof. You say Iqbal tried to bring so many ideas from different personality, and which this make he and apa tak jelas.
Not clear.
Not clear about himself. And how does you recommend us to find and curate our reading? Because you said in the first part that we need to study the title, but you don't mention that we need to research about the author ethic, their character, their worldview. I mean, I want to touch about the certain scientific group, which is they themselves is very much hypocrite, and they want to impose their worldview and superiority of methodology. What's your view and how you suggest ourselves to curate our reading? Yeah.
Okay, I don't believe in curating your readings. To be frank, this is where I agree with Iqbal, because his whole idea of stray reflections is that one must enter into any rooms that one find that may be useful for you. Curating means that you are basically limiting your vistas and the ocean that you need to discover for yourself. So in any study of anything, if you want to be an expert in it, you must do this. And this is Al-Ghazali's method. You must know something of everything and everything of something. Right? What do I mean by that? It is only when you can open up your mind to as many fields and books and readings as possible that you understand the breadth of knowledge. But one who knows the breadth are people who can talk in the coffee shops. So if you go coffee shop, the uncle can talk about politics, can talk about sociology, can talk about psychology, correct? Can talk about every topic. But the real thinker, according to Ghazali, is not someone who knows everything of something. You need to know to have that. It is someone. It's not someone who knows something of everything. The real thinker is someone who knows everything of something. So that's why if you read Munkis min Dalal, Ghazali used the word depths. I entered into the depths of philosophy and understood it without the aid of a teacher. That was his mistake. And he acknowledged it. He didn't study from a teacher. He studied it himself. So that is the thing that we need to also take note of. When you want to read something, fas'alu ala dhikr in kuntum la ta'lamun. Ask. When you read something from Iqbal, ask people who know Urdu, check again whether it's this is what we have to do as scholars, because you need to always engage in a dialogue with other scholars at the same time. Don't curate your reading. I will tell you that even though I'm trained more as a historian by training, I read a lot of philosophy. I also read economics. Sometimes my wife wonder why I'm reading science. In my spare time, I would read books that are. If I tell you the kind of books that I read, you wouldn't want to talk to me. But I read as much as possible because that is what knowledge is all about, right? You need to draw from different. I like to read art also sometimes. Yeah. Okay, some more?
One question on YouTube. One of the criticism of Iqbal is that he misread and selectively reconstructed the Islamic intellectual tradition through a Eurocentric view. What do you think of this?
Oh, I think that's unfair. If anything, he was anti-Eurocentrism. He was trying to not say that Europe has to be totally removed, but he was saying what Dipesh Chakrabarti said it nicely later on. Please read the book of Dipesh Chakrabarti. The title of the book is Provincializing Europe. He was trying to provincialize Europe. He's saying that, okay, Europe is very powerful, but it's just a province in the world of thought. It's just one. There's so many other provinces that we need to look at. But at least, to be fair to Iqbal, he puts the Islamic tradition right at the center of the many provinces of thinking. And he was trying to do that. His failure was clarity. That's all. This is my criticism of him. If only he could have been clearer, he would have been less misunderstood. Right? But Iqbal is Iqbal. He doesn't understand himself. Right? Okay. Some more? Haikal just now.
Question.
Yeah.
Okay, because you mentioned about Iqbal advocating about experience of time.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I'm wondering, did he ever talk about some sort of altered state of mind in experiencing time? What I mean is sometimes, in Sufism or even in some field, you can have altered state of mind such as 1 minute can be experienced like probably an hour. Okay, and it's not just imitation. You can actually study in that short space of time to other people, but you actually manage to take in so many things that will normally take 1 hour of reading. I was wondering.
Well, I will not talk about Iqbal first. There is a scholar of Islam. His name is Ibnul Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Ibnul Qayyim al-Jawziyah, when his son wanted to get married, he wanted to give a gift to his son, hadiah to the son. So what was the gift to the son? He was riding on a camel at night from one place to another, and he finished writing the whole book. Can we finish writing a book on a camel? We cannot even finish writing a book on a Microsoft Word. So how did he finish the book? How did Ibn Hazm write Al-Muhalla of many volumes? How did all these scholars write so much? The answer is simple, and Iqbal talks about this. Who is the owner of time? The maker of time. Who determines whether time is long or short? The maker of time. What does the scholar have to do in order for him to write as much as possible? He must submit to the maker of time who controls his time. And this is the ailment of the scholars today. Many scholars say, I cannot write enough or fast enough. Why they cannot write fast enough? Because they don't surrender their time. And this is Iqbal's point. The surrendering of your time is the hardest. The true scholars of Islam, what Iqbal is trying to say in very complicated way, always surrender their time. Who does this? Who does this? All the scholars of the past. What does the scholar of the present do? These are awalin and this is the akhirin. What does the akhirin do? We don't surrender. We don't surrender. Until and unless we can do it, according to Iqbal, you will not write like those people in the past. So I'm going to conclude.
Okay, just a follow-up on that,
Okay.
because I'm doing my PhD title is Reality of Time in the Quran.
Hmm.
So if I need to some academic references on that concept, because I do believe in it, because this is through Sufi Kampung and all that.
Sufi Kampung.
Yes. But if I want to make academic reference to such idea, what would you recommend? What writing? What books? If I need to make academic references viable for a PhD on that idea, that the old scholars actually got that altered extended experience of time, so they can achieve much in what others see as very little short time.
I will start by reading Ibn Qayyim Al-Fawaid first. Read Al-Fawaid. Everything is there. Al-Fawaid is a beautiful book, the book of advice of Ibn Qayyim. You will find so much references on time in Al-Fawaid. Even if you read all the other scholars, one name that can come to my mind now that is always referencing time in his book is, you're talking about classical or current?
That means academic standard for now.
Okay, maybe we'll take it aside. I'll send you from some references, but start with Ibn al-Qayyim, Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, Ibn Kathir, and then there's a beautiful scholar who's much forgotten now, his work. His name is Ibn Bazzar. Ibn Bazzar. I will send you some stuff. But all of these scholars actually, in fact, most Muslim scholars of the past, the classical period, they all talk about time, even Ghazali and others. The problem with us is that we don't read them in that manner. And this is Iqbal's point. The issue is not that we lack tradition. The issue is that we don't know what to do with the tradition. That's why the Muslim ego suffers. Kita tak tahu apa nak buat dengan apa yang kita ada. This is the issue. Okay, I shall not hold everybody anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the time has ended. But if you do have other questions, you can come and ask him personally, because other people probably need to beat the traffic. But just on a personal reflection.
What?
Sorry.
Sorry, this is not the interruption. I just found it. In our journal, IIUM journal, Intellectual Discourse, there's an article by Professor Muhammad Usman Al-Muhammadi,
Oh, mashallah. Just
the famous,
Yeah.
Allah yarham, the father of Ahmad Al-Muhammadi,
Yes.
our professor here. And it is titled Iqbal and the Malay World. I'll ask Harith to share it around. So, and he talks about Iqbal and Nasir, Muhammad Nasir, and all that. So this is something new. I like to read it too. Thank you.
Okay, just a personal reflection. I think one word that can sum up this session is that Iqbal was very ambiguous. And at a certain time, you can see that he was really inclined toward Western philosophy and using it. At the same time, he was berating it, looking at it as something very negative. And one time he was expanding on ego. It reflected more or less more on the later Sufism, although he was refuting the later Sufism. And because of that, there are some things that we can take from this book when it is beneficial to us, because as Prof said by the hadith of the Prophet, that hikmah is the lost property of the mu'min. And also Iqbal in this book, several times he said that we should have an independent critical thinking. And he also said that in the preface that the philosophical thinking is not final, and they might be further on much sounder views, and in that sense that we can critique him and also appreciate him. So thank you everyone for coming. If you do have some feedback on this session, please do fill up the survey, and if you and I am student, you can fill up the IATN. Thank you very much.